culture, talking about how the culture could shape future in Indonesia, but also Pacific. I think from one perspective, the diversity of the Indonesia nation can be seen from the variety of religion, ethnicity, regional language, you say, geography, clothing, food, and culture, of course. So I think all of them possess enormous strength and potential as a social and cultural capital that bonds the nation. But not only bonds the nation, those elements that I've mentioned about could also, as an existence, could also be taken for granted. And for the past years, we've witnessed humanity based on cultural movement all over the world. Some emerge from unfortunate situations, while the rest are simply an awakening moment for all of us. But I think the main goal was, is, and will always be the same: to find peace among the differences and diversity. It hasn't been easy, we have to admit that, yet throughout its history, Indonesia, as a nation that warmly welcomes newcomers of different ethnicity, different race, different religion, that now form what we call the modern Republic of Indonesia. This common heritage and acceptance of differences are characters of the Indonesian nation. A similar story of origin is also shared by countries in the Pacific. We're going to talk more about that. We're going to talk more about how we can communicate well. Therefore, today, we would like to discuss how to have a common understanding of this common heritage that is, I think, very essential in order to secure a shared future where everyone, and I would like to repeat, everyone, can live in peace, prosperity, and with dignity. And today we have a great lineup of speakers to unpack today's topic. We have His Excellencies Ambassador Tri Tayat, Advisor to the Minister on Political, Legal and Security Affairs. Good morning, Pak Tri. And we also have Mr.
Good
Rob William
morning, Mbak
Goodfellow.
Nitya.
Selamat pagi, Pak Tri. Terima kasih sudah
Selamat
hadir pada pagi
pagi.
ini. Thank
Terima
you for
kasih.
thank you for holding this webinar today. And also along with Pak Tri Tariat, we also have Mr. Rob William Goodfellow, lecturer and researcher at the University of Wollongong, Australia. Good morning, or should I say good afternoon, Mas Joko, ya.
Selamat
Thank you for
pagi di sini, selamat siang di Indonesia.
Yeah, terima kasih. Thank you for joining us today. And also along Mr. Rob William Goodfellow, we also have Bung Billy Mambrasar, Special Staff to the President of the Republic of Indonesia. Bung Billy, thank you for joining us today as a representative of the young generations. And also we have Professor Herawati Sudoyo, Senior Research Fellow of the Eijkman Institute. Good morning, Prof. Hera. How are you
Yeah,
today?
I'm fine, thank you.
You look great as always. So we do have three great speakers, and we would like to discuss more about our topics today. We'll welcome you to write down your questions as we would discuss it later after all the presentations. So to begin with, we will hear the opening remarks directly from Ambassador Bapak Tri Tariat, Senior Advisor for Political, Legal and Security Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. Bapak Tri, please, the screen is yours. Please enlighten us with your opening remarks.
Terima kasih, Mbak Nitya, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our participants from wherever you are streaming this webinar. Let me start by thanking Kompas TV for once again co-hosting our webinar, and also expressing our highest gratitude to our distinguished speakers today, Mr. Rob Goodfellow, or also known as Mas Joko, Professor Herawati Sudibyo, and of course, Bung Billy Mambrasar. Friends, the theme of today's talk is not a new issue. Numerous studies and on how the plural and heterogeneous Indonesian societies came to be and shaped the modern nation of Indonesia had been conducted. When one thinks of Indonesia, then one may ask, how did people with such diversities from the variety of religion, ethnicity, regional language, geography, clothing, food, and culture, even until now, blended together as one nation. What made us a nation? Ladies and gentlemen, the idea to unite the Indonesian people as a nation could be traced back to the 1920s. From this period to 1940s, our nation's founders wrote and spoke on how Indonesian people must unite and put aside the differences based on religion, the color of their skin, ethnicity, language, geography, or culture. They clearly stated that Indonesia must be born from the common passion as a united country from Sabang in Aceh province to Merauke in Papua province. The idea crystallized through the Youth Pledge or Sumpah Pemuda, our national ideology, Pancasila, and our national motto, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, or unity in diversity. Hence, as Nitya said, instead of being an obstacle, diversity became a powerful source for our nation making process and the main source of strength and potential as a social and cultural capital that maintains the bond of our nation today. Our diversity should be seen as fluid to situational and contextual needs, which has been and continues to be refined from time to time. Take an example, the ethnicity of Indonesians of the eastern region, such as Maluku, North Maluku, Papua, and West Papua, who incidentally shares the common Melanesian ethnicity with many countries in the Pacific, such as Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, etc. How do we then see and define ourselves? Noting the fact that Melanesian descendants and Austronesian descendants have been living in modern Indonesia since many thousand years ago. How do we see it? Through the cultural and genetic study perspectives? This, of course, is just one of the many questions that can be raised, knowing the wide ranging characteristics of this issue. Dear friends, it is time for us to know us better and for the global community to know us better too. The initiative today is aimed as a sharing forum among experts, diplomats, journalists, academics, students, activists, the Asia Pacific family, and the global community in general. Our distinguished speakers today will provide us a deeper knowledge and awareness on how culture and genetics shape Indonesia and the Pacific, and moreover, how this knowledge can bind us stronger, be it as a community, as a nation, as the Asia Pacific family, and as the global community as a whole. With that, I'll close my remarks by quoting Maya Angelou, an American poet and civil rights activist. We humans are more alike than we think we are not. While that is true as to the countries we come from, our beliefs, our cultures, we are still all more alike than different. I hope you enjoy the discussion. I thank you and terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Thank you for the remarks as well as the positive vibes that you brought just now, Ambassador Tri Tarian. I quoted that I think we're more alike than we think that we are different. That's a powerful quote, and I think we have to ensure that we're going to talk more about that. How that we more linked than we thought that we weren't. So before we begin this presentation sessions, I would like to remind and inform all the participants who want to give questions later on. Please use the format. Please take attention to it. Pay attention for the format. You have to write down your name first and then the institution that you represent and the questions for which speaker, so I'm not mistaken. And then the last ones is obviously the questions. If you I'm going to repeat once more. You have to write down your name first, the institution that you're representing, the questions for which speaker, and then the last one is your questions. You can write it down during the presentation from the speakers, but only on the Q&A box. I repeat it once more. You can only write down on the Q&A box so you can be created, and then I'm gonna repeat it. I'm gonna read it after the discussions is over. So there will also be Gopay balance value of total 1.5 million rupiah for only three participants who are active and have the most interesting questions. So please, for all the participants, stay tuned to this webinar and prepare your best questions. So we're gonna have great discussions today. So, speakers, I think you're all ready. Let's begin this discussion. First of all, I would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Rob William Goodfellow as a lecturer and researcher at the University of Wollongong, Australia, or as we speak, that you've given a name in Javanese name by the Sri Sultan Mas Joko. Betul ya, Mr. Rob? Even given the Japanese name by the Sri Sultan Mas Joko. I think it's a very lovely name that you've been given by the Sri Sultan. So I would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Rob William Goodfellow to start this discussion as a first speaker. I would like to remind that there will be approximately 12 minutes for each presentations, and if I may have your permission to give at least 2 minutes left as a reminder. So, Mr. Rob, I think one of the best way to promote understanding and appreciation of different cultures is through listening to those, who are part of the fabric of the society, as well as embracing them as an inclusive part of a bigger community. What are your thoughts about culture and communal values of the situations?
Rob
Because
started.
I think that what Pak Tri has mentioned, we are linked more than we thought that we weren't. So, what are your thoughts about
That's it.
culture and
Yeah.
communal values of these
And this one
situations?
voices.
Okay. Mbak, sebelum saya mulai untuk orang Indonesia, saya minta maaf. Bahasa Indonesia saya sekarang kurang lancar. 15 tahun yang lalu lancar sekali, tetapi sekarang lidah saya menjadi kaku. So saya minta maaf, saya harus memakai bahasa Inggris
None taken.
sementara. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
your
So,
bahasa sounds great, by the way.
okay. So interesting question. If we look for the things that we have in common, there are things like a love and understanding of culture, of the importance of friendships and
You
networks,
sit down.
and
I
I
have
guess
some on the
food.
stove.
And that gives me an opportunity
You
to
can make
talk about my
louder.
new book.
Okay.
So Ibu, can I ask my 12 minutes starts now? Is that right?
Please do.
Okay, all right. So what I've decided to do is look at two very strong women from opposite ends of Eastern Indonesia. So from Bali at one end of Indonesia and Papua at the opposite end. And I want to look at them in terms of role models, but also comparisons and possibilities. So have you got a copy of my my PowerPoint that I can refer to? Okay. So in Bali, I've just finished a book called So Many Delicious Years about Ibu Murni. She's often referred to as the mother of tourism in Bali. She established the first international standard restaurant in Ubud called Murni's Warung in 1974. And it's interesting, some of her patrons back then were like Karen Goodman, who is an Oscar-winning director, actually came to Indonesia as backpackers, which is interesting, but have continued this relationship with Murni over the decades. So Ibu Murni is a proud Balinese Indonesian, and she's admired, she's celebrated, she's loved, and she's respected. She's admired because she founded the first international standard restaurant in Ubud. She's celebrated because of her global network of friends and supporters. I mean, she's loved by her local community because she's remained resilient during the pandemic. Murni's Warung is one of only 4 restaurants in Ubud that didn't close during the pandemic, and she is respected for 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 who she is. Now, um, it's interesting reflection on Bali. Bali is the world's most prominent tourism brand, most recognizable tourism brand. So when Ubud is doing well, Bali is doing well. When Bali is doing well, Indonesia is doing well. And later, I want to make a comparison with Papua and with Ibu Yambisi, Professor Yambisi. So, um, Indonesians and people all over the world, they understand that Bali is a part of Indonesia. They understand that Balinese culture is unique and different, but the Balinese are fully Balinese and fully Indonesian at the same time in terms of your national motto, unity in diversity. So um, Indonesians accept Balinese as fully Balinese and fully Indonesian, and non-Indonesians recognize unity and diversity as an important attribute of the Indonesian state. I guess if Bali is the world's most prominent tourism brand, then unity and diversity is the most important brand of the Indonesian state. So when people around the world think of Indonesia, they think of many people, many cultures, many ethnicities, a range of values, but united as one people. Australia, of course, is also a multicultural nation, and our motto could quite easily also be unity in diversity. But Indonesia is one of the great success stories of multiculturalism. And in Ibu Murni, at one end of Eastern Indonesia, we see this great success story. So I now want to make a comparison between Ibu Murni in Bali, who was I guess she was a pioneer in tourism and a figure that is loved and respected by her community. And I want to make a comparison on the opposite side of Eastern Indonesia with Professor Yembisi. Now, Professor Yembisi is also a pathfinder, somebody that has broken new ground. She was the first Papuan to be appointed to a national cabinet under your president's first government, and she was a cabinet minister between 2014 and 2019, and Minister of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection. But she was also the first Papuan woman to be appointed as a professor. So on opposite sides of Indonesia, we have these Eastern Indonesia, we have these strong women, these role models that have strong values. Now, it's interesting that people understand what Balinese values are. A love of culture, of hospitality, of ceremony and community. And they're understood and they're respected and they're celebrated. Now, at the opposite side of Eastern Indonesia, we also recognize Professor Yembisi as a significant figure. But do we really understand what her values are? Now, there are many shared values. The Papuans share a love of community, but also there are other values that are like a respect for the natural environment and a veneration of elders. So we see some crossover, we see some differences, we see some similarities. And my point is that we need to understand Papuan values as well as we understand Balinese values in the context of unity in diversity. Now, my question is how do we accomplish that? Now, one of the ways is to celebrate important community symbols and figures like Professor Yembisi, to better understand her contribution to Papua and to Indonesia. Now, Professor Yembisi's uh, passion is actually to challenge some widely held beliefs uh, about equal opportunity for women and girls. And when she was a cabinet minister, that was one of her important projects. So yes, we understand Ibu Yembisi as a symbol and a figure in Indonesia, but do we fully understand the values that inform the sorts of things that she believes in? So one of my recommendations is to further research the values that underpin Ibu Yembisi's view of the world. And I think that that's something that we need to do so that other Indonesians and other people better understand the role of Papuans in the Indonesian multi-ethnic state. So just to recap on the sorts of things that I've said, in Eastern Indonesia, on one side you've got a strong woman and a strong figure in Ibu Murni, a pioneer in tourism, a respected figure. I mean, when you look at the book I wrote, some of the called So Many Delicious Years, we have these really important people like Karen Goodman, who's an Oscar-winning director. We have Bill Dalton, one of the world's leading travel writers. And we have David Raitt, who's a prominent musician in the United States. They all recognize her as Balinese and Indonesian. So my hope is that we can develop a process by which the same things can be said about important symbols and figures in Papua, like Ibu Yembisi. And to do that, I believe that we need to fund a research project into revealing and understanding what Papuan values are. Because we understand the values of other Indonesian ethnicities. We understand the values, the positive values of the Bataks and the Javanese and the Balinese. But I think if other Indonesians and people around the world better understood the values of the Papuans, then I think from that, respect would grow, mutual respect, certainly mutual understanding, and we would just have a better sense of the power of unity in diversity. So my 12 minutes is nearly up. Thank you for the opportunity to promote my new book, but also to tell a very brief story about two important symbols in Eastern Indonesia at really bookends, opposite ends. So they share many things in common, but there are some opportunities now in terms of better understanding the value systems of people like Professor Yembisi. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Rob, for your interesting slides and presentations. I would like to appreciate how much you give a huge proportion of the both Ibu Murni and Ibu Yembisa. I think both of these women are incredible. As an Indonesian woman, also they have achieved so many. And I think the value as manifested by women from Eastern Indonesia, I think it's very important for us to brought up these days and to be talking about how we able to nurture the bridge of understanding between different viewpoints. Thank you very much for the explanations, and I would like to read more from your book. I think it's a very interesting book. Thank you for explaining, Mr. Rob. And Mr. Rob has talked about the roles of women, how Indonesians are aware of the differences but not taking the other as the opponent. So I think we're going to continue to the next presentations. Our next speaker, we have Bung Billy Mambrasar. a special staff to the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Bung Billy as a representative of the younger generations. I think it's very interesting that we have you here today to explain about the implementations. We're aware of the special autonomy granted by the government for Papua and West Papua. It's for the goods and the rights of Papuans. But I think what we would like to hear more from you is how to make sure that ensuring that the bridge, the communication, it's been delivered to convey the right message to Papuans. Um, Bung Billy, if I could take notes on your thoughts about this today's topic.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Pak Tri. Good morning, Prof. Herawati. And good morning, Mr. Rock. Nice to see you this morning. So before touching on the perspective of the youth, let's take a look at the history of the spatial autonomy laws. So the law number 21 in 2001 was launched and then revised by the number 35 in 2008 because of the inclusions of the West Papua province, Provinsi Papua Barat as the new one. So then the spatial autonomy will be covering both provinces, not just Papua, but also Papua Barat province. And since that implementations total money which has been absorbed, as I quote from the Ministry of Finance, is around 138.65 trillion rupiahs in 20 years. That's not including around 702.3 trillion for the Dana Desa, the villages money, and also the funding from the ministries or the bodies around 251 trillion rupiahs, which consists of 85 trillions for Papua and 41.87% for the Papua Barat province. And just recently we know that the new law launched, that is law number 2, 2021, with a couple of revisions that I want to touch. I will be touching slightly here. That is not only the revisions on the money increased from 2% of the general allocations to 2.25%. So there is an increase in the amount of the money. But that's not actually the main important point of it. The main important point of it is actually the revisions of 5 chapters, which actually gives more emphasis on giving orang asli Papua or the indigenous Papuans more rights to be participating in the development instead of not just being a subject of an object of the development, but they'll be subjects of the development. So the chapter 66, there's a revision in the Dewan Perwakilan. So we'll have Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat on the regions level, and it should be filled by the indigenous Papuan or orang asli Papua. And also we see chapter 6 about the province expansions, but it's only with the agreement of the Majelis Rakyat Papua, like the representative of the indigenous people. Also, we talked about the budget increased from 2% of the national general allocations to 2.25%, in which 1% is general allocations, but 1.25% is a performance-based allocation. So if the province does better in delivering the development programs and policies, then it will be getting 8.25%. Then chapter 68 about a spatial body to accelerate the development. So currently they're having this, they're shaping this body, Badan Khusus Percepatan Pembangunan Papua Barat. It's covered in chapter 68, and also chapter 75 about terbasus, peraturan daerah, peraturan pemerintah, as the derivatives of the spatial autonomy law, to then being the umbrella of accelerating the development. So based on that information, so and yeah, many people start posing things on the media saying that the spatial autonomy is a failure, nothing good about it for Papuans and everything. But as a spatial staff of the president, and I was given um, a specific task to focus on the education, entrepreneurship, and youth. So, based on my assignments, I wanted to take a look at the perspective of the young people of Papuans. And by the definitions of the young people, it is under the group's age of those who were born in 1990s and 2000-ish. So it's called millennials generations and Gen Z generation Z. And I think maybe Nitya is part of that generation's age. Yeah. So
Yes, it is.
yeah. So what I did with my team is we went around 22 provinces, sorry, 17 provinces, all around Indonesia, and visited 22 cities. And we met with around 6,300 youth to talk and listen to their perspective about the spatial autonomy. Um, and the reason being, if you take a look at the previous spatial autonomy implementations, around 30% of the money was used for education, which is actually the biggest proportion. So that means if the previous spatial autonomy was implemented in 2001, with 30% of the money was used for education, then it should be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of Papuan youth who have been educated and have been doing great things all around the world, not just in Indonesia. And I am one of them because I did my bachelor with spatial autonomy scholarship. Without that scholarship from the spatial autonomy money, I wouldn't be able to go to school because I come from a very underprivileged background, a family like literally poor. Like we didn't have electricity, and I had to sell cookies on the street and on in the market to make money just for my school and my food. So I wanted to see the other hundred thousands of youth who have been educated using this money, like the 30% of the spatial autonomy funding. So we went around the 17 provinces. We talked to 6,300 youth, and we did research, quantitative and qualitative research, like talks and quantitative questionnaires and qualitative conversations research on to the 550 youth. And maybe you can keep going to the next slides. Yeah, next, please. Next, please. So I want to show the diagrams of the performance of the spatial autonomy since 2001. If you take a look at the Human Development Index, education participation, the numbers increases significantly, even though it is still below the national numbers. But the positive trends, the trend is going up. Next slide, please. Next. So this is actually the summary of my conversations with those 6,300 youth, but we did research on the 550 millennials in Generation Z, asking what their perspective about the spatial autonomy. And surprisingly, 51% saying that it is not a success, neither a failure. We just need to do better on the implementations. That's pretty much it. Most of them didn't say that actually it is fail or it is succeed. they just said that we need to implement it better. So we gave a follow-up questions on what should be done. What about the fund, the budget? They said it's enough already. If there is no change in the accountability, in the capacity of the local governments, and also in the way we implement the development programs, and nothing better will be achieved. No change at all if we don't do that. Around 25% people saying that it's a fail, and we ask them, are you optimistic or pessimistic that we can do better on that? And around 21 people, or around 15% saying that, well, we can do something better about it if you accommodate what we think should be done right. So then, next slide. So then we did qualitative conversations with them on what is your expectations, what do you want. So again, I want to emphasize the reason why I focus on the millennials and Generation Z, because as I mentioned, 30% of the money of the spatial autonomy previously was used for the education. That means that Papuan youth who were born on 1990 and 2000 are actually those demographic who mostly are benefited of that programs, of the education programs. We can get access to better school. Even I could go to overseas and study with scholarship in top schools. And now these youth are coming back to Papua and ready to develop the country, ready to develop the province and the provinces. So we asked them, what is your expectations? And there's a lot of hundreds of statements that we recorded, and we made summary of it. But when we make a big summary of what they want, they said, we want to be involved in the development process. We've studied overseas, we have knowledge, we have master's degree, we have doctoral degrees, or we studied engineering, science, all those hard fields that we were asked to do by spatial autonomy scholarship. But now when we come back, we don't know how can we involve in the development process. And I think, yes, we totally understand the bureaucracy structure, the political recruitment, how the government system is actually dominated by the old players, the status quo, people who want to preserve the power and everything. So this youth, they want to be involved, but they don't know how to be involved in themselves. And I'm actually also sharing my story that before being appointed as a special staff of the president, I was a social activist and an entrepreneur. I came back from overseas. I studied in the UK and also in the US. I came back. I decided to come back to Papua as a Papuan myself, as a native Papuan. I feel a huge obligations for me to develop my land and my country. So I decided to come back, but I didn't know how to involve myself in that, in the development process. Next slide, please.
Billy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would like to remind that you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah. So I will close as a closing remarks that based on my conversations with them, they, including myself, we want to be involved in the development process. So the notes that I want to put here for a better progress of Papuan is, number one, it's good that we have revised the spatial autonomy law, but we have to change the way we do the development process as well to do it better. We have around 69,000 Papuan youth ready to develop the Papua and to develop Indonesia. That's what I told Mr. President. Mr. President, we Papuan youth are ready not just to build Papua, but we want to develop Indonesia. We want to be part of the Indonesian development process, and we're ready for it. 96,000 people. So we want to increase the accountability of the spatial autonomy process. We want to also increase the capacity of the local government because they're actually the one who implement the law, to implement the development programs. Also, um, there should be an umbrella or a law or whatever it is to accommodate the participations of the Papuan youth in the development process. Maybe they can be involved in the Badan Khusus that is going to be launched. Maybe we have to think how to involve them and work together with the local governments and etc. So that's it from me. If you ask me questions, are you optimistic that will be better? Will definitely be better. We have been doing, you know, good good things. We have delivered lots of good things. We can do so much better with the notes that I've mentioned. Accountability, transparency, and more participation of the youth to change the landscape, to change the things, to change the way we do things. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bung Billy, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that by ensuring Papuans right into educations and to also health and economic development, that you're ensuring us that the Papuans younger generations, including you and our friends, that you're not only ready to give more, to contribute to Papua, but also to Indonesia, that you're willing to do more and you're ready to do more. I think that's a very good point taken from your presentation. Thank you very much, Bung Billy Mambrasar. So I would like to move on to our last speaker, but I would also like to remind all the participants that you may already write down your questions down, but only on the Q&A box. I would like to remind that you have to write down your name first, the institutions next, which speaker that you want to ask, and then your questions, obviously. That will make me easier to curate the questions and then read it out loud when all the speakers' presentations is done. So by saying that, I would like to move on to our last speaker for today's webinar. I would like to welcome Professor Herawati Sudoyo, Senior Research Fellow from the Eijkman Institute. Prof. Hera, it's always nice to have you on this kind of webinar. I think what Mr. Rob or Mas Joko has said about that we have so many things in common that we can look up by looking up to our women, and then Billy has mentioned that the younger generations, especially in Papua, they are ready to do more. But by saying that, I think culture has taken more important roles. But how to understand that we do have so many things in common in our culture? I think we would like to hear from you how Indonesian forefathers' genetic and cultural history, has genetics connection with people of the Pacific, of course, as well as their connection to the phrase Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. Prof. Hera, the screen is yours. I think we have a little technical problems. Prof. Hera, if you could unmute.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, and also evening for all of the participants. Good day for Pak Tri and also the speakers. It is very interesting to talk as the last person talking about the common heritage and shape future. Why? Because it is very timely with the activity of us in the eastern part of Indonesia. So in this presentation will be kind of, I think, genetic 101 or molecular biology 101 that led the participants to understand genetics and maybe also continue their study in the Faculty of Science after this. Okay, this opportunity, I would like to talk about unity and diversity, a DNA message from Indonesia and the Pacific. Next slide, please. Indonesia. Indonesia is a dynamic theater of human development and migration. Let's study Indonesia. It is a very diverse country representing more than 500 ethnic population. We have more than 700 languages. Grimm's mentioned about 719, but I think the live language is only 706 at the moment. Most languages belong to Austronesian family. The Papuan languages or the non-Austronesian spoken in the eastern part of Indonesia. And the Manusia Indonesia they are all influenced by several migration waves by our ancestors. And why Indonesia is, I mentioned, dynamic theater? Because we have one of the first traces of non-modern humans dating as early as 67 years. Next slide, please. Austronesian languages are spread across half of the globe. The Austronesian diaspora, people speak from Madagascar to Rapa Nui, Eastern Island in the east. And this is not really, it's kind of like blurred, I think. So I'm not sure whether you can read it, but there's a Malayo-Polynesian. We have about 1,257 languages spoken by more than 430 million global population. That's the Austronesian diaspora. But not until actually about 300 years ago that we found the similarity between the Indonesian archipelago and the Pacific. Next slide, please. What does comparative linguistics tell us about the history of the Papuan speaking population or the non-Austronesian speaking population? We're still studying that. But if you look at the Austronesian and the Pacific, we can see the similarity between words between all of the people from near Oceania, remote Oceania, northern island Melanesian, such as all of the island near Papua, without the New Guinea. So we can see the similarity and the differences by studying the so-called Swadesh word that similar word in different part of Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. If we are going to talk about the common heritage, we actually talk about the population marker. There are 3 population markers: cultures, language, and the last one is genetics or DNA. So culture as population marker, you can find it in arts and crafts and architecture, cloth, behavior and ceremonial, many things. But here I just want to let you know the similarity in megalithic stone found in Indonesia, which is in central Sulawesi, in Bada Valley, and Aotearoa, meaning this is a New Zealand, and Rapa Nui in Eastern Island. Look at the type of house architecture. From Ethiopia to Timor to Papua and New Caledonia, we can find similarity. And yet, we also can find the difference. From north to south, we can found the similarity between the house in Payuan ethnic population, Sulawesi, which is a da'a, it is kind like a house, a tree house. And you will amazed by actually the Korowai house, a tree house usually built on a single tree, but frequently the base of the house consists of several living trees and wooden poles. So it is about 6 to 12 meters and can be as high as 35 meters from the ground. This is all of those similarity, and yet we found some differences in the cultures as an example. Next slide, please. This is the third population marker. We are talking about genetics. DNA can be used as migration marker. Why? Because it can tell you about the geographic origin of the people or of the population. How to do that? As a geneticist, you know that there are three kinds of genetic inheritance pattern: from maternal side, from paternal side, and from parental, which is both parents, mother and father. From the maternal side, as shown by mitochondrial DNA, this is mitochondrial DNA is actually shared between member of the family from one mother. You can see this is, we are talking about the migration of women. Paternal side is shown by the differences in Y chromosome, shown by the paternal side, paternal inheritance. And the parental side, you can see the mixture of both, from half from father and half from mother. Next slide, please. So if we talk about Indonesia first, there are 4 ways of colonization of Indonesian archipelago. The first one is out of Africa. The out of Africa, 100,000 years ago, our ancestor migrate to Europe, Central Asia, and coming through the Indonesian archipelago to the Sahulen, which is Papua and Australia, still become one land. And also they passed the Sunda land. Kalimantan, Sumatra, and Java still stick together. That's the first migration of our ancestor. The second wave is coming from Central Asia 30,000 years ago. The third one coming from Taiwan. That's the out of Taiwan, the express train. You have to look at how they actually migrate. They passed the north part of New Guinea and followed island, jumping from island to remote Oceania. The fourth, which influenced the Manusia Indonesia, the Indonesian, is coming from trades from China, India, Arab, and please do not forget the spice route. So the 4 ways of colonization, that's those that make Indonesia, Indonesia. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, what about the Pacific? Following the first migration out of Africa, I think the first people crossing Indonesia archipelago arrived in near Oceania about 40,000 years ago. Please just press that. Oh, we missed one. There is a mixture in the Papua region, and later gene flow brings Papuan ancestry to remote Oceania. So the Papua side and northern part of Papua is the most important things in terms of admixture event, creating unique genetic components in Pacific population. Next slide, please.
Hera, I'm sorry to interrupt. I would like to remind you for the 2 minutes left for your presentation.
Thank you. So these slides show the admixture in Indonesia between the Austronesian speaking population and non-Austronesian speaking population. If you look at it carefully, none have 100% of whatever genetic background, meaning there is an admixture between those components. Next slide, please. So we confirm and we can see the link between Indonesia and Pacific, which is in our gene, because in the figure on top, you can see that how the Indonesian Lesser Sunda Island and some part of the genetic background can be seen in people from the Pacific. Next slide, please. So I would like to actually, this is the Papua dalam Arus Sejarah Bangsa, which is can be used for students to know Papua and its culture and its genetic. The last slide, I would like to quote Mahatma Gandhi. Next slide, please. That our ability to reach unity and diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. Hera. I think it's an amazing quote from Mahatma Gandhi. I think what you just mentioned about the book Papua dalam Arus Sejarah Bangsa, I think it's a great book for us to not only knowing so we can comprehend and understanding more about Papua. Thank you for the presentations. So we had our three speakers. They had the presentations and already gathered some questions that all the participants have wrote down in the Q&A box. So speakers, I would like to begin our Q&A sessions right now. Maybe I would divide it to two sessions and make the best of our times. I would like to read first the question from Satrio Bagas Santoso. Satrio Bagas Santoso is an alumni of Ateneo de Davao University. His question is to Mr. Rob Goodfellow. Mr. Rob, Satrio's questions is, as well as we all know, there is a common knowledge and perception that Bali is Indonesia, or even common misperception that Bali is a country. So do you think that there should be more exposure towards other Indonesian provinces and cultures? And if yes, how can we create more exposure to these provinces such as Aceh, Papua, and even Dayak for Borneo? Hold the answer. I'm gonna read all the questions, all the three questions for the first part of the Q&A sessions. And the second questions will be from Bella. And Bella would like to ask, I think it goes for all the speakers. Her questions will be, what are the three most important things that people should know about Indonesian culture? I think it's a very interesting questions that goes to all of the speakers. Okay, so we have two questions for the first sessions. I would like to hear the answer first from Mr. Rob Goodfellow.
Okay. Can you hear me, Ibu?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
loud and clear.
Okay, in cultural studies, we talk about the cultural iceberg. And an iceberg sits in the ocean, and you can see 10% of the iceberg above the water, but 90% is concealed beneath the water. And that's like culture. So what we see, the things that we share in common, are obvious. And there are many things that the people of Indonesia share in common, from Aceh to Papua. But there are many things that they don't share in common, and they are the things that we need to better understand. And this is quite foundational, because even though all of the work that's being done now is important and essential, if we don't understand the differences, if we don't celebrate them, if we don't comprehend them and understand them, then everything that we build on top of that is is at risk.
Hmm.
So, in terms of the question about Bali, um, a lot of people visit Bali because it's the world's most recognized tourism brand.
It is.
And when they go to Bali, they know what they're going to get. They see Balinese culture, but we know that beneath the surface, there are things that we don't see. And to understand that, we have to ask questions, we have to make friends, we have to be good listeners, we have to spend time with people. And I would argue that the same process also exists in Papua. And that's why I chose those two important figures, Ibu Murni and Ibu
Yambise.
Bise. So they share many things in common, but there are differences, and we need to better understand the differences if we are to really fully realize the power and potential of unity in diversity. So I hope that answers the question.
If I might to interrupt, Mr. Rob, but I think because the question is related to, do you think that there should be more exposure towards other Indonesian provinces? You were talking about how if we're looking up to those two amazing women, they did achieve so many, but you have to have more and different understanding for
Absolutely.
each culture. So do you think that it's a matter of we need more exposure, or is it just about that we need to make time more to communicate more and understanding more?
Okay. It's all those things, but it's also asking the right questions. And the right question is the questions that people want to answer. So, for instance, Mas Billy talks about the energy and the enthusiasm of young people in Papua
Mhm.
to not only build Papua, but build Indonesia. So, my question is, what values underpin um, that enthusiasm? I mean, do Papuan young people have a value that places an emphasis on education and consultation? I believe they do, but that's not well understood by other Indonesians. So if you ask an Indonesian, oh, what is the culture of Java? They'll say that it is halus, it is being
Mm.
diplomatic and sensitive and avoiding conflict and so forth. If you ask an Indonesian about the positive attributes of the Bataks, they'll say it's entrepreneurialism. So when you ask the question, what are the values of the Papuans? I don't think the answer comes quickly to mind, and it should. And if we look at Ibu Yambese as a role model, we can see that she has certain values about the rights um, and opportunities for women and girls, about consultation, about um, about belief and faith and community. Because Professor Yambisi is a Papuan Christian, and uh, Ibu Murni is a Balinese Hindu. So straight away we can see that there are differences, but we want to better understand these differences, because managing the similarities is easy. Managing the differences actually really does allow us to create something new. And Indonesia is a work in progress made up of its various contributions from people all over the archipelago. So my question is, what are the values that underpins the contributions of Papuans to recreate not only Papua but Indonesia new? So just briefly, let's go back to the cultural iceberg. What we see is obvious. What we don't see needs to be researched,
Mm-hmm.
needs to be investigated. And then once we have the answer to those questions, then we can celebrate that. We can say Papuans stand for veneration of their elders and respect for the natural environment and consultation and education and participation. Are these Papuan values? I believe that they are, but we need to understand that scientifically, and then in a cultural way, we need to celebrate it nationally, just like we celebrate Balinese culture, just like we celebrate Ibu Murni as the mother of tourism in Bali. We should be celebrating Professor Yambisi as the mother of education in Papua. So there are many possibilities. We just need to ask the right questions.
Okay. Bung Billy, would you like to add more about this, the answer that Mr. Robert has explained beautifully, I think, but I would like to hear your thoughts about this.
I am not an expert in value or so on, but based on my limited understanding, is that even between generations, there'll be different perspective and values or understanding about things. But I think, taking lines or straight lines from the explanations of Mr. Goodfellow, um, the reason, for instance, reason being, for instance, me, I studied in the US and then Australia and the US, but I decided to come back home because I always feel that Papua is my home, and I see the similarities between all the Papuans is we we love to stay close to our family, to close to our homes, um, and that explains why we are not as as brave as orang Batak or orang Jawa untuk merantau, like to go out of our province. We love to stay at home. We love to stay close to our parents, to our family. So I think the value of community being part of us is something I see common. But it gives strength, more strength to the sense of contributing back. Like for instance, the government sent thousands and thousands of Papuan youth to study overseas. Most of us decided to come back home because we feel family is number one priority of our value. That is a strength for the government to then utilize this bunch human resources to then contribute back to develop uh, the province. Number two, there are a couple of specific values that is respecting the environment, uh, respecting the forest and jungle. Based on my experience going around 256 villages, 15 kabupaten in the previous 4 months, I talked to people, both old and young people, all of them are disagree, for instance, for say monocultural agricultures like kelapa sawit and stuff. Like we want to protect our jungle, we want to protect our
Yeah.
forest, we want to live in the side by the nature. So I think those two values that I noticed and I observed can be the strength to
Yeah.
utilize.
I couldn't agree more because I think those, especially the environmental value, is what Mr. Roberts mentioned earlier. That could be the strength of the Papua if you want to convey those message to all of the people that haven't got the chance to understand Papuans in the meantime. So I would like to hear from Prof. Hera. This is according to the second question from Bella. What are the three most important things that people should know about Indonesian culture? And later on, I would like to hear the thoughts from the other two speakers.
Thank you, Nitya. I think the first one that it is diverse, and I think we have to accept the differences because difference is beautiful. And second things, I think there are similarities of the culture between one ethnic population and others, but we shouldn't use that as one because there are might be a pressure to have one culture or limited, not all of the culture. But I have been working and about 130 ethnic population, communicating with them, mingle with the people, stay and live with them, and learning about culture and tradition. And I found it fascinating. And I feel blessed that I have the opportunity to absorb all of the differences. And we shouldn't actually lose those. We lost the language because nobody wants to talk about it. I think it's kind of like a very a small population, and it will lose
Yeah, it's
anyhow.
forgotten.
Yes, and but other than that, I think we should preserve the diversity of all of the culture. Uh, I have two master students with us from Papua.
Okay, I think we have a technical conditions with Profera. It doesn't matter. I would get back to Profera just in a minute. But I think I would like to hear more from Bung Billy first. Bung Billy, could you give your thoughts about the second questions that Profera was trying to explain about? She mentioned about the diversity that could be our strength point.
You know, we have to acknowledge that we are living in a very diverse environment. When we talk about Papuans, non-Papuans, we tend to forget even in Papua there are lots huge of diversity as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you see on the opening ceremony of the pond just lately, when they performed hundreds of different dance moves from 5 different regions of Papua, there's lots of diversity even within Papua. And that actually the reason why the culture is so beautiful is that because when you mix different cultural values and different cultural um, sides of things, that will be resulting in a very very beautiful things. And that's not only just in art performance, but even in the values. Like, you have people from highlands in Papua who are very brave, who are very fighter, and you have these people from the seaside, from shorelines, who are very relaxed, loving and stuff. If you combine these two different values into a structured, say, structured, aggregated cultures of Papua, then you will be creating a very, very good generation who is ready to develop the province.
Mm-hmm.
And that also applies to Indonesia. You see from Sabang to Merauke, like hundreds, even thousands of different values when you combine and you include that in a very structured education curriculum, you know, and then creating the generations that understand the values and also implement the values on the way we do things on our daily um, activities. It will be we will be creating a very superpower Indonesians in the future, just based on our own values. So I,
Just
you know,
just based on our values. I had this I would say rather funny experience with a previous ambassador from Australia. He was mentioned about in Indonesia we have so many different delicious food that it is that it becomes difficult to just promote one. If you compare it to other countries like Vietnam or Thailand, they have this one specific food to promote. So I would like to hear from Mr. Rob. Mr. Rob, from your point of view, what are the most important things that people should know about Indonesian culture? Because yes, that Billy have just mentioned that we have so many values. Prof. Farah also mentioned that our diversity is our strength. But from your point of view, how could we convey this value? How could we convey this culture into one easier way to understand from your point of view?
It's an interesting that you raise the issue of food, because we know that the way that people prepare food is, like cultures, constantly changing and never static. We're always learning from each other. I mean, if you look at the two women that I talked about in my presentation,
Mm-hmm.
Ibu Murni in Bali is a citizen of the world, but she is also Balinese, she is also Indonesian, and that's complex. Now, on the other end of Eastern Indonesia, Ibu Yem Bisi, Ibu Yem Bisi is educated in Singapore and in Canada and in Australia, where she did her PhD. So she is also a citizen of the world who, interestingly, also returned home, as Mus Billy said. So that appears to be a Papuan value, that people have an experience of the world, but they want to go home to contribute to their communities. I think we
Mm-hmm.
need to better understand that. So she is a citizen of the world. She is a Papuan with certain Papuan values, and she is also an Indonesian, contributing to the Indonesian whole. So my argument is that, um, like food, we should always be learning. We should always be adopting new ideas. But to do that, we need to better understand it. I think we need a cookbook. We need to share our experience with other people. So again, it comes back to the issue of culture and values. I mean, the Papuan people, they understand their culture and values. And as Mas Billy said, it's diverse. It's people from the interior, people from the coast. But the question is, do other Indonesians understand Papuan culture and values? And if they did understand them, then I believe that they would respect them, and there would be mutual respect, and there would be mutual understanding. And on top of mutual respect, we can build anything if that's your starting point. So it's interesting again that you mentioned food, because these are things that we have in common. Friendships, um, networks, food, culture, art. These are these are things that are common to all people. Of course, they're different, but they're not risky. Culture is a very safe place for human beings to transact. And I guess the opposite of that is politics, which is risky and uncertain. So I think
Uncertain.
if we concentrate our efforts on understanding people, their cultures, their beliefs, and their values, and we build a really strong foundation, and we can do that quickly. And if we celebrate these values and these unique cultures, because you can't talk about one Papuan culture. As Mas Billy said, there are many cultures, but let's understand them a little bit better. Let's learn how to celebrate them. Let's even learn to adopt some of them, because right now, a respect for the natural environment is critical to the survival of the human race. And if the Papuans have got something unique to contribute in terms of a relationship with the natural value, then I want to know about that, and I want to adopt that into my own value system. And I think that once other Indonesians are exposed to this, they'll say there's something there that I want as well. I want to learn how to have a relationship with the natural environment. I want to learn how to bring good things back to my community. I want to learn how to participate. So I hope that answers your question. It's not simple, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't put effort into understanding it.
Yeah, I could agree more that we're not talking about only about food or about their values of appreciating the environment, how they willing and prefer to come back to their own city, to build their own city, to their own village, and they contribute more for its society. I think it's the Papuans' value that more should be, you know, understand more about it. I would
Well,
like,
you
yes.
can also say that about the Javanese. They get very homesick. I did my PhD with many people from Java, and they loved their experience of being in Wollongong, of making friends and being part of the community, but they became homesick. And they see that as a positive value, that they learn something and then they bring it back. And it's the same with the Papuans. They learn something and then they bring it back. But Mas Billy's point about Papuans not only building Papua, but building the whole of Indonesia is very valid. And maybe one of the things that they will do to build Indonesia is a different relationship with the natural environment. You know, the protection of forests and rivers. I mean, I saw a very positive news article last year about your president funding a program to clean up rivers in Java. It made news all over the world. All of a sudden, people had a different sense of protecting the natural environment. And one of your most polluted rivers was completely rehabilitated because of a change in values. So, if that relationship with the natural environment is a Papuan value, and if your president and other Indonesians are adopting that value, then that must be a good thing.
There will be, I believe in that. So I only have
Can
limited
I?
time for the last questions. I would like to hear from Prof. Hera. This is the last question from Huzaifa from University of the South Pacific. She is also a lawyer and tutor. Uh, Prof. Hera, the question is, has there been more attention given to education, health, and technology? We've heard from Bung Billy that it's needed, more implementation of the education for Papuans specifically.
Yes, I think I agree with Billy that education and health is the most important thing that have to be provided in the era. I've been everywhere almost to Papua to different kind of places, and some of the places that I went to, say for example that they have a school, but there is no teacher. And some of them have the teacher, but the kids have to follow their parents to go to find the gaharu, say for example, a tree. So now I think after returning to Jakarta, then I think we kind like a lot sit together and discuss how can we actually give this our experience and all of that we see in the field to the local government or to the pemangku kebijakan stakeholders, and that in certain places we need it urgently, and in other places that might be available. So I think those kind of input has to be given.
Thank you, Prof. Hera. I'm afraid that will be our last questions that that is curated by the committee. I would like to thank all the participants. So to close down our webinar today, I would like to hear some closing remarks from all the three speakers. I would like first from I think from Billy as a representation as a younger generations. Please make it as packed as it should be.
Thank you very much. So, adopting culture is starting by understanding, like what Mr. Goodfellow said, understanding what are the values. And after to understand what the values, then we have to study, like total study, to understand what is values, and also the willingness to include that values in all aspects. Could be political, design, could be developmental plan and design and everything. And that requires kelogohan, the openness of the central government, and to include the values in the developmental process, to do it bottom up, to inclusive, and to be respecting and design the programs based on the values. And lastly, don't forget that we have hundreds of thousands young Papuan and young Indonesian ready to develop the country, ready to develop the provinces. So please be open and inclusive, to work together with them, to include them, to listen to them, to give them more space, in the way we do things. Um, I think that's all from me, and I'm very optimistic that we're gonna be, better and better.
Very optimistic too. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, Billy Mambrasar, a special staff to the President of the Republic of Indonesia. Mr. Rob William, Mas Joko, please, your
Okay.
closing statement.
Okay, just listening to Mus Billy, I can hear that one of his values is that it's very important that he is listened to. And he said that young Papuans want to be listened to. They want to be taken seriously. In finishing, I just want to quote your president, something that he said. He said, your president said, I want to listen to the people's voices, and I'm willing to open dialogue for a better Papua. The people of Papua don't only need healthcare, education, and the construction of bridges and roads. They also need to be listened to. Now, that is a Papuan value, and I think we need to better understand that if we're going to reach the great potential of unity and diversity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rob. Very, I think it's a highlight for us, for all of us. Prof. Hera, last but not least, please give your closing statement for today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Nitya. Thank you very all. I think talking about common heritage and the future, shared future, I found that culture diplomacy is more powerful than others, to be able to talk to people, to listen to people. And might be people do not actually understand and realize that, but it is more powerful. So open dialogue and equality, I think that's the key to success. Thank you.
I agree. I agree. Thank you very much, Prof. Hera. Thank you very much, Mr. Rob. Thank you, Billy, for the closing statement. So, participants, thank you again for your participation in today's webinar. That was a discussion with all the speakers. But before announcement of the winners, as I promised before, I would like to ask for your 30 seconds of your time to complete the polling of some questions that have been displayed on your screen. I would like to invite all the attendees or the participants to fill out the poll for today. It is for our feedback. Just 30 seconds. Because we have about 330 participants that join our webinar today. I would like to invite all of you to write down your thoughts about today's webinar and just taking a few seconds. And I was also would like to thank for all three speakers for today, Mr. Rob William Goodfellow, lecturer and researcher at the University of Wollongong, Australia, and also Bung Billy Mambrasar, special staff to the President of the Republic of Indonesia, and Professor Herawati Sudoyo as a senior research fellow from the Eijkman Institute. Thank you for all the speakers that given us such an explanation, such a thorough explanations about today's topic, common heritage, shared future, culture and genetics that shape Indonesia and also the Pacific. I think it's a very important issues that we have to understand, and hopefully that we could contribute more. If Billy were talking about how the younger generations could contribute more, I think by understand more about our own culture, that's one way to be able to contribute more to our country. And thank you for all the participants. I'm aware that uh, some of the participants are not from Indonesia, so thank you again for joining this webinar. So that was the polling, some questions that have been displayed on your screen. Thank you again for completing the polling. So as I promised, I was also announced the best winner for our questioners today. I chose three winners chosen by the team too. And the winners are Satrio Bagas Santoso, Bella, and Huzaifa. Congratulations for all the three winners. Um, please give your contacts to the committee so that we can talk more about the identifications, verifications, so that we can give you the gold by balance for in total 1.5 millions for all the three winners. Congratulations to the winners who will be contacted by the committee once again. And I would like to also thank you so much for the speakers for coming and taking the time to talk today. Also to the webinar participations who joined today. I think to conclude this webinar, this sessions, if we're talking about Indonesia, can only mean both forward and backward projections. It's to revisit its common heritage, including how to acknowledge the diverse than Indonesian archipelago, welcome newcomers of different ethnicity, race, and religion that now form the Republic of Indonesia, and how to shape for a better humankind that is sustainable and contribute productively to the needs of the human race. It's our contribution that we've been waiting for. So I think it's up to the younger generations to come up with all of the ideas and innovations. Thank you again for participates in this webinar. I would also like to thank you, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and His Excellency's Ambassador Tri Tariat, Bapak Tri, advisor to the Minister on Political, Legal, and Security Affairs. Thank you for holding this webinar. So I hope all of you in good health, in good shapes, and I wish you all good luck and thank you for joining this webinar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam kebajikan, salam sejahtera, sehat semuanya. Thank you for joining this webinar. We're hoping to see you and discuss more about this in a later on webinar. Thank you again. Terima kasih. Selamat siang. Sampai jumpa.
Baik, terima kasih semuanya sudah selesai. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, sukses Mbak Nevia,
Ya.
Mas Joko.